The night passed slowly. Sarah lay in her small room, staring at the cracked ceiling. She couldn't sleep. Her thoughts kept returning to the man in the black suit. His silence, his eyes, his calm face, it all replayed in her mind like a film. Why didn't he say anything? She whispered to herself. Why just walk away? For Sarah, the day had been a disaster. She had lost her job, lost her patience, and maybe even lost her dignity in front of strangers. But for Adrian Blackwood, the millionaire she had unknowingly shouted at, the day was unforgettable for another reason. Adrian sat in his luxury apartment, high above the city. The walls were decorated with art worth more than most people's entire lives. Yet, inside the silence of his home, Adrian felt something unusual. He thought about the girl. Her voice. Her courage. Her anger. All his life, people spoke to him with respect, fear, or fake smiles. No one dared to raise their voice. No one dared to tell him he was wrong. Yet, that morning, a simple young woman had shouted at him without hesitation. Adrian had built an empire of wealth and power, but her words hit him harder than any business rival ever had. His assistant knocked on the door. "Sir, tomorrow's meeting is at 9. Should I arrange the cars?" "Yes," Adrian replied shortly, but his mind was still elsewhere. When the assistant left, Adrian leaned back in his chair, his jaw tightening. Who was she? He didn't even know her name. But the memory of her face wouldn't leave his mind. The next morning, Sarah woke up with heavy eyes. She had no job, no money, and no idea what to do next. Her landlord had already warned her about the rent. She walked outside, hoping the fresh air would calm her thoughts. But the city was unkind. Everywhere she looked, she saw tall buildings, expensive cars, and busy people who didn't notice her. She felt small, invisible. Still, she remembered the silent man. Rich people, she muttered bitterly, they think they own everything. But deep inside, she wasn't just angry. She was confused. Why couldn't she stop thinking about him? Meanwhile, Adrian was at his company headquarters. A tall glass building touched the clouds, and inside, people rushed around to make sure everything ran perfectly. When Adrian entered the office, the air grew heavy. Everyone lowered their voices. Everyone moved carefully. His presence carried power, the kind that made others nervous. But Adrian hardly noticed. He was sitting in the boardroom, pretending to read reports. His mind drifted back to her words, "People like you, too busy with your money, thinking the world belongs to you." It stung. Not because it was rude, but because it was true. He realized he didn't remember the last time someone had spoken to him honestly. Even his closest friends only cared about his wealth. His mother loved him, but even she treated him like a fragile glass figure who must always be respected. That girl, however, had looked at him like he was just another man in the street. And strangely, Adrian liked it. The days passed, but destiny wasn't done. On the third day after the incident, Sarah sat in a small cafe, counting the last few coins in her hand. She could only afford 1 cup of tea. She sipped it slowly, staring at the steam. Suddenly, a black car stopped outside. The door opened, and to her shock, the same man from the street stepped out. Adrian. He walked inside, calm as ever, his suit perfect, his watch shining. People turned to look, whispering his name. But Adrian didn't notice them. His eyes searched the room, and landed on Sarah. Sarah's heart raced. She froze, almost spilling her cup. What was he doing here? Did he recognize her? Did he come to confront her? Adrian walked past the tables and stopped just a few steps from hers. For a moment, he just looked at her, the same deep, unreadable gaze as before. Sarah tried to speak, but her throat felt dry. Then Adrian did something unexpected. He slightly nodded, and walked to another table, sitting down with his assistant. Sarah's hands trembled. She couldn't understand. Why had he looked at her like that? Why not say anything? The silence was louder than words. That evening, Sarah left the cafe, her mind spinning with questions. She had no idea that Adrian was not ignoring her. In fact, he had already asked his assistant to find out who she was. Adrian Blackwood, the man who could buy anything, now wanted to know the name of the girl who had dared to shout at him. And while Sarah thought she was just another invisible woman in the city, her life was already tied to his in ways she could not imagine. Because sometimes silence hides the loudest emotions. And Adrian's silence was about to change both their lives forever. 3 days had passed since Sarah last saw him at the cafe. She tried to push the memory away, but the truth was, the man in the suit had carved a space inside her thoughts. His silence had been louder than her anger, and she couldn't understand why. But Sarah had bigger problems. Her rent was due, her landlord was threatening to throw her out, and she had no job. She had gone to 3 interviews, but all of them ended the same way, with rejection. Employers wanted experience, confidence, and money for training. Sarah had none of those. That evening, as she sat on her bed, holding her last note of cash, her phone buzzed. Unknown number, you are invited to work at Blackwood Mansion. Report tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. Transport will be provided. Sarah blinked at the screen, confused. Blackwood Mansion. She had heard of it. It was one of the most famous houses in the city, a symbol of wealth and power. But why would anyone invite her there? She thought it must be a mistake. But the message repeated, do not ignore. Opportunity will not come again. Her heart raced. Something inside told her this was real. She had no other choice, no other job, no other hope. With trembling hands, she replied with a simple word, okay. The next morning, a sleek black car stopped outside her small building. The driver opened the door politely. Sarah, dressed in her best clothes, which still looked plain compared to the car, stepped inside. The ride felt unreal. The city streets turned quieter as the car drove uphill, toward a gated estate surrounded by tall trees. When the gates finally opened, Sarah gasped. The mansion looked like something from a dream. Tall pillars, wide gardens, sparkling fountains. It wasn't a house, it was a palace. She stepped out, clutching her old bag tightly. Her eyes couldn't stop wandering. Everything looked too perfect, too expensive, too far from her world. Before she could gather her thoughts, the front doors opened. A graceful woman in her late 50s stepped forward. Her smile was warm, her eyes kind. Welcome, dear, the woman said. I am Mrs. Blackwood. Sarah froze. Blackwood. The name echoed in her mind. And then she realized, the man she had shouted at, his last name must also be Blackwood. Her throat went dry. I think there has been a mistake. I don't belong here. Mrs. Blackwood's smile only grew softer. There are no mistakes, child. Come inside. The mansion's interior was even more breathtaking. Golden chandeliers, marble floors, and portraits of ancestors lined the walls. Sarah felt like a trespasser, afraid to touch anything. Mrs. Blackwood guided her into a large sitting room. You will be helping me here, in the house. I believe you are honest, and that is what matters. Sarah frowned. But how do you know me? The older woman's eyes twinkled. Let us just say, someone told me about you. And I trust their judgment. Sarah wanted to ask more, but before she could, footsteps echoed through the hall. Heavy, calm, powerful footsteps. Her heart jumped. And then he appeared. Adrian Blackwood. The same man from the street. The same man from the cafe. Standing in his own mansion, tall and unreadable, his sharp eyes locked on her. Sarah's breath caught. She felt the ground shake under her feet. What was happening? Why was she here, in his house? Adrian's mother looked between them and smiled gently. Adrian, this is Sarah. She will be helping me with some work here. For a moment, silence filled the room. Adrian's gaze didn't leave Sarah. She felt small under his eyes, remembering the way she had shouted at him. Finally, Adrian gave a short nod and turned away, leaving the room without a word. Sarah stood frozen, her hands shaking. She wanted to run. She wanted to disappear. But Mrs. Blackwood touched her shoulder kindly. Do not be afraid, she whispered. You are exactly where you are meant to be. That night, as Sarah lay in the guest room of the mansion, she couldn't sleep. The bed was soft, the room was beautiful, but her heart was restless. Why had they brought her here? Why did Mrs. Blackwood seem so sure about her? And most of all, why did Adrian remain silent, yet keep looking at her with those unreadable eyes? Little did she know, Mrs. Blackwood had seen something her son could not. She had seen the way Sarah treated him like a man, not a millionaire. And deep in her heart, she had already made a plan. A plan that would change Sarah's life forever. Because sometimes, the strangest invitations lead to the greatest stories. Sarah woke up in the mansion the next morning with a heavy heart. The sunlight slipped through the golden curtains, but it didn't calm her. She felt out of place. This was not her world: marble floors, grand hallways, expensive furniture. She was just a girl who had recently lost her job and shouted at a stranger. Yet here she was, in that stranger's house. She slowly stepped out of her room, afraid of bumping into Adrian. The memory of shouting at him on the street still burned in her chest. She wished she could erase it. But what confused her even more was his silence. Why hadn't he said anything? Why hadn't he exposed her in front of his mother? Downstairs, Mrs. Blackwood was waiting with breakfast. Her smile was gentle, almost motherly. "Did you sleep well, child?" Sarah nodded politely. "Yes, Thank you for letting me stay here." "You are welcome here, Sarah," Mrs. Blackwood replied warmly. "And please, call me Elena." Sarah hesitated but gave a small smile. She felt a strange comfort in the woman's kindness. But Adrian was there too, sitting at the table. His sharp eyes glanced at Sarah once, then returned to his newspaper. He didn't say a word. The silence made Sarah's heart beat faster. She wished he would yell, argue, something. But he remained calm, unreadable as always. Later that day, Mrs. Blackwood walked with Sarah in the garden. The flowers were blooming, the fountain sparkled in the sun, but Sarah's mind was restless. "Mrs. Elena," she finally asked, "why did you invite me here? You don't even know me." Elena stopped near the roses, looking at them with a soft smile. "Sometimes, my dear, a mother sees things others cannot." Sarah frowned. "I don't understand." Elena turned toward her. "My son, Adrian, is a strong man. People fear him. People respect him. But no one treats him like a human. Everyone bows, everyone flatters, everyone hides their true face when they are around him. Except you." Sarah's cheeks burned. She remembered that day on the street. I shouted at him. I was rude. I shouldn't have." Elena raised her hand gently. "No. That is why you are different. You did not care about his money, his power, or his name. You spoke to him as if he was just another man. Do you know how rare that is?" Sarah blinked, speechless. She had never thought about it that way. Elena leaned closer. Her voice lowered, almost secretive. "I want you to stay. Not just for me, but for him. Adrian needs someone who can break his walls. And I believe that person is you." Sarah's heart skipped. "Me? But I'm no one. I don't even belong here." Elena smiled knowingly. Sometimes, the people who think they don't belong are exactly the ones who are needed the most. Meanwhile, Adrian was watching from his window. His mother and Sarah walking together in the garden stirred something inside him. He didn't like people invading his private world, yet he couldn't deny that this girl had already done it, without even trying. He remembered her voice, her fire, the way she looked at him without fear. It unsettled him. It intrigued him. For years, Adrian had built walls around his heart, protecting himself from people who only saw his money. But Sarah was different. And that difference was dangerous. The days slowly passed. Mrs. Blackwood carefully created moments for Sarah and Adrian to spend time together. She would ask Sarah to bring Adrian his tea, or help her arrange books in his study, or join them for dinner. Sarah tried to stay polite, but every time she stood near Adrian, she felt nervous. His presence was powerful, his silence heavier than words. Sometimes, she caught him watching her, and her chest tightened. One evening, Sarah entered the library to place some books. She thought Adrian wasn't there, but he was sitting in the corner, reading. Their eyes met. She froze, holding the books tightly. I didn't know you were here. I'll leave." But before she could, Adrian finally spoke. His voice was deep, calm, steady. "You don't have to run every time." Sarah stopped. It was the first time he had spoken directly to her since that day on the street. Her heart raced. She wanted to reply, but words failed her. Instead, she quickly nodded and left. Adrian closed his book, his lips curving slightly. It wasn't a smile, not yet, but it was something. That night, Elena watched her son from the doorway. For the first time in years, she saw a flicker of life in his eyes. Her plan was working. Sarah thought she had only accepted a job. But in reality, she had stepped into a carefully woven plan of a mother who wanted her son to feel human again. A plan that would soon turn anger into connection, and silence into emotions neither Sarah nor Adrian were ready to face. Because sometimes, a mother's heart sees love, long before it is born. The days at Blackwood Mansion began to change slowly. What started as simple chores for Sarah turned into small, unexpected moments that brought her and Adrian face to face again and again. At first, their interactions were stiff. Sarah avoided his eyes, and Adrian kept his words short. But Mrs. Blackwood's gentle tricks, asking Sarah to help Adrian with his work, requesting her to bring him tea, arranging dinners where they had to sit across from each other, started breaking the silence. One evening, Sarah entered the study with a tray of tea. The room smelled of old books and leather. Adrian was seated at his desk, reading documents. He looked up as she placed the tray gently. She turned quickly, ready to leave, but his voice stopped her. "Do you always shout at strangers?" Sarah froze. It was the first time he had mentioned that day. Her cheeks flushed. She turned slowly, trying to hide her embarrassment. I didn't mean to. I was just angry." Adrian's eyes studied her quietly. "Most people wouldn't dare. But you did." Sarah's lips pressed together. "Because I didn't know who you were." For a moment, silence filled the room. Then, to her surprise, the corner of Adrian's lips curved slightly, like the shadow of a smile. Sarah's heart skipped. She had never seen him smile before. The ice began to crack. Sometimes, they argued, about books, about opinions, about little things that didn't matter. Sarah's fiery nature clashed with Adrian's calm control. Yet strangely, their arguments never felt bitter. Instead, they carried a spark, an energy that pulled them closer. One afternoon, they walked in the garden together. Adrian's mother had asked Sarah to show him the new flowers she had planted. "These roses," Sarah said, bending down, "they look perfect, but they have thorns. Just like people." Adrian looked at her, his eyes narrowing slightly. "And what about you? Do you have thorns, Sarah?" She met his gaze without fear. "Everyone does. Even you." Adrian didn't reply, but inside, he felt something stir. No one had ever spoken to him this way. No one dared. But it wasn't only arguments and tension. There were moments of softness too. One evening, during a storm, the lights in the mansion flickered and went out. Sarah was walking through the hall when thunder crashed, making her jump. Suddenly, Adrian appeared beside her, holding a lantern. His presence was steady, calming. "Don't be afraid," he said simply. Sarah looked at him, her face lit by the glow. "I'm not afraid," she whispered. But inside, her heart raced, not from the storm, but from the closeness of the man standing beside her. The mansion that once felt cold now felt alive. Laughter began to echo in the halls. Adrian, who had always been silent and distant, found himself speaking more when Sarah was around. Sometimes, late at night, he caught himself replaying her words in his mind. For Sarah, the walls of fear she had built around herself started to fall too. She began to see Adrian not as the rich stranger she had shouted at, but as a man, lonely, guarded, but human. One night, Sarah was sitting by the fountain, staring at the rippling water. Adrian approached quietly and sat beside her. "Why do you always look at the water?" he asked. Sarah shrugged. "Because it listens. It doesn't judge. It just reflects." Adrian watched her for a moment. Then he said softly, "I don't judge you either." Sarah's chest tightened. His voice wasn't cold, it carried warmth, almost vulnerability. She turned her head, and for the first time, their eyes didn't clash in anger or tension. They simply connected. Inside the mansion, Elena Blackwood smiled quietly as she watched from the window. Her plan was unfolding beautifully. Her son, who had been locked in silence for years, was finally opening his heart. And Sarah, the girl who thought she was a mistake in this world, was the reason. But love is never simple. With every wall that broke, new emotions rose, strong, confusing, and dangerous. Because the closer Sarah and Adrian came, the harder it became to ignore the truth. Their worlds were different, their lives were apart, and their story had started with anger, not love. Still, destiny doesn't care about beginnings. And as Sarah walked back to her room that night, her hand brushed against Adrian's for the briefest second. Neither of them pulled away. In that silent touch, something unspoken was born. The days inside Blackwood Mansion were no longer the same. What had begun with anger now carried something deeper, something neither Sarah nor Adrian could deny. Every glance between them lingered a little longer, every word carried a hidden meaning, and every silence felt louder than before. But still, neither of them spoke the truth. Sarah told herself she didn't belong in his world. She was just a guest, a helper, someone passing through. Adrian, on the other hand, struggled with emotions he had locked away for years. He was used to control, power, and silence, but with Sarah he felt alive. One evening, the mansion was filled with soft music. Mrs. Blackwood had arranged a small dinner for her friends, and Sarah helped with the arrangements. She wore a simple dress, nothing expensive, but her natural grace made her shine more than all the diamonds in the room. Adrian noticed. He couldn't look away. Throughout the evening, people whispered about Sarah. "Who is that girl?" they asked. "Why is she here?" Sarah heard their words and felt small again. She wanted to leave, but Adrian's eyes kept finding hers, as if telling her to stay strong. When the guests finally left, Sarah went to the garden, her chest heavy. She stared at the roses, fighting back tears. "I don't belong here," she whispered. "I shouldn't be here." A voice came from behind. "You are wrong." She turned, and Adrian was there. The night was calm, the stars bright above them. Adrian stepped closer, his eyes fixed on her. For once, his face wasn't unreadable. It carried emotion, raw and unguarded. "You think you don't belong," he said softly, "but you are the only one who has ever made me feel human." Sarah's breath caught. She had never seen him like this. Vulnerable. Honest. "Adrian," she began, but her words faded. He took another step, his voice low but steady. "Do you know why I never replied when you shouted at me that day?" Sarah shook her head. "Because for the first time in my life," he continued, "someone spoke to me without fear. Without pretending. Without caring about my money or my name. That moment changed me. You changed me." Sarah's eyes burned with tears. "I was angry. I didn't even know who you were." Adrian gave the faintest smile. "And that's exactly why I can't forget you." The silence between them grew heavy, filled with unspoken feelings. The fountain nearby whispered softly as if urging Adrian to continue. He took a deep breath, then reached into his pocket. His hand trembled slightly, something no one in the world had ever seen him do. When he opened his palm, a small velvet box rested there. Sarah's eyes widened. Adrian looked directly into her eyes. His voice was calm, but inside, his heart raced faster than it ever had. "Sarah," he said, "I don't want a life where people only see my wealth. I want a life where someone sees me. And you already do. From the moment you shouted at me, you saw the man, not the millionaire." He slowly opened the box, revealing a simple but beautiful ring. "I don't care how different our worlds are. I don't care how it began. What I care about is how it ends. And I want it to end with you, by my side. Will you marry me?" Tears slipped down Sarah's cheeks. She covered her mouth with her hands, shocked, trembling, unable to believe what was happening. She had walked into this man's life by mistake, shouted at him in anger, and now, he was asking her to stay forever. Her voice broke as she whispered, "Adrian, I don't know if I'm enough for you." Adrian stepped closer, gently taking her hand. His touch was firm but tender. "You are more than enough. You are the only one who ever was." Sarah's tears turned into a soft smile. She nodded, her heart overflowing. Yes, I will." Adrian slipped the ring onto her finger, his own chest finally free of the silence that had ruled him for years. From the mansion window, Mrs. Blackwood watched quietly, her eyes shining with joy. Her plan, her hope, her faith in destiny, it had all come true. Under the starlit sky, Adrian pulled Sarah into his arms. For the first time, she didn't feel like she didn't belong. She felt like she was home. The girl who once shouted at the wrong millionaire had become the only woman he ever wanted to hear for the rest of his life. And what began as anger had finally ended with love.